The interesting thing to think about, the what if, is what happens to the crowds in New Orleans if JYD stays? Because there's no guarantee they ever return to where they were. There's no guarantee they stay where they are. So what do you think happens if JYD stays and, that event doesn't rattle Mid-South Wrestling for the remainder, for the remainder of its existence, but at least through the remainder of 84? Do you think it made a giant difference in New Orleans, or had the damage already been done in a few different ways with JYD in New Orleans?
Well, in a few different ways. You talked about that. Who was it? Mike Mills and some other people from that area have done interviews talking about that. It was starting to be known that Dog had a problem. He was in a bad neighborhood in New Orleans on a regular basis, and he couldn't hide.
Yeah, Professor Ricardo Coleman was on 605 Superpodcast, and he grew up in the projects. So he remembers, when Dog would be there, the buzz was all around. And that was a lot of the people that were going to one of the arenas in New Orleans, because there were various different places with various different crowds.
Yeah. And the downtown auditorium was the big one for Dog. And that's where they'd had the tremendous business when he first got hot and got in the Birds and DiBiase turning heel and the whole 9 yards. By the time we got there in 84, that's the one town. I mean, everything was down at that point, but that's the one town that it seemed, because they were still running it weekly on Monday nights at the downtown building. They hadn't gone to the UNO Lakefront Arena yet, and they weren't going to St. Bernard anymore. So it was really downtown in the Dome for the first bit there. And the downtown building, I was kind of disappointed in, because I wasn't seeing, that it was dangerous, but I wasn't seeing the fucking big houses. It wasn't a big payoff in the territory anymore, because Dog had cooled off. So, and then also you saw by the Superdome match, Dog just wasn't in, he didn't have it in the ring anymore because of his conditioning and however long he'd been staying up and whatever the fuck. So it may have been that New Orleans wasn't going to end up doing well for the rest of the year either, just because. And then the knee lift from Wrestling 2 when they turned him heel. And
I was going to ask you about that, yeah.
And Dog just kind of fucking shivered and it was the only shitty knee lift Mr. Wrestling 2 ever gave, and it was pretty much a lot of it was Dog, the way he took it.
And that's not the only time he did that kind of bump. It's one of the weird things in his run where he would just do like a tree falling. That was his bump.
Yeah, and so nobody bought that. So, and that's the thing is, later on that year, the Dome, we peaked with the first Dome in 84. That was 23-something thousand people. It was $166,000 house. Or 107, I'm sorry, it was 167. But anyway, that was the big one. The next one was about the same thing or close, and then it started dropping because that's when Dog left. And at the same time, the downtown auditorium houses, as I recall, started pretty much going down to the point where they started going more to the UNO Lakefront Arena, which that started doing better than, I remember one specifically, a $47,000 house there, that was better than anything we had done at the downtown auditorium financially. And it was a whole different crowd. It was people that didn't want to go downtown anymore, but now they would come out there. So the New Orleans changed, and the bigger houses were at the Lakefront Arena, and then the Dome, kind of petered on out by the end of the year to where it just did $100,000 on Thanksgiving. And that was the scaffold match. We did like $5,000 difference in Houston at the Sam Houston Coliseum, where we were at every 2 weeks, and the Dome, which was the fourth Dome that year, $5,000 difference in the house for the same main event. So New Orleans really, and it never picked back up. And that was the first place that Scott Muntz noticed about the problem when he called Watts, a year and a half later, and said, well, I think we're fixing to be fucked. All the escort services in New Orleans have closed down. And Watts is like, what the fuck? Get your own pussy. And he said, no, you don't understand. If you can't get a hooker in New Orleans, there's no money here. And he was right.
Well, I guess we'll transition to the next scandalous story from TMZ Sports.
I was about to say, you can't really do a sponsor transition off out of business hookers, can you?
No, you can't.